Okay, good evening, and we're going to go ahead and get started today. I want to welcome you to our talk tonight, the first chicken burrito in Western North America, Zooarchaeology of Avian Remains from the San Diego Royal Presidio by Dr. Aharon Sasson. My name is Stephanie Sandoval, and I'm the Public Archaeology Director here at the San Diego Archaeological Center. The center is a nonprofit dedicated to the preservation of local archaeological collections, and our focus is on curation, research, and education through museum exhibits and adult and youth programming. Unfortunately, the center is closed right now due to COVID. This is why your support by attending this and other virtual lectures, donating, or becoming a member is so important to enable the center to keep our programs and curation efforts going. You can stay connected through our virtual programs and ongoing blogs, online exhibits, and archaeological news posted on our website and social media. I want to let you know about our upcoming events. Our next living room lecture is only a week away on December 10th, A Day in the Life of a Physician, Renaissance by Dr. Phil Goshinsky. Then on January 27th, we welcome Dr. Philip de Barros presenting his research on ironworking in Togo, West Africa. So please check our website, sandiegoarchaeology.org, for details and registration for both of those events. Tonight, we will be using the Q&A feature, and you can find that on your Zoom control panel. Feel free to submit questions at any time. However, we will answer them at the end of the presentation. I'm very pleased to have Dr. Aharon Sasson with us tonight. Aharon is the co-director of the San Diego Zooarchaeology Laboratory at the San Diego Natural History Museum. He received his Ph.D. in Zooarchaeology from Tel Aviv University and has studied faunal assemblages from the ancient Near East, as well as from numerous prehistoric and historic sites in California. Aharon is the author of Animal Husbandry in Ancient Israel, a Zooarchaeological Perspective on Livestock Exploitation, Herd Management, and Economic Strategies. He has recently published with Susan Arter their study on chicken remains from the San Diego Presidio in the highly regarded journal, American Antiquity. And you can find the link to that article in the chat. And if anybody cannot access that link, please, you can send me an email and I can send that to you later. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Aharon Sasson. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you for the Arc Center for hosting this meeting. I will talk today about the avian remains, and for the most part on the chicken remains that we studied and analyzed from the San Diego Presidio. For those of you who are not familiar with the field of zooarchaeology, combines zoo and archaeology, and we study faunal remains, animal bones from archaeological sites. And this is one example of our studies. Before I start, I would like to dedicate this presentation to Mark Roeder, our friend, who passed away a year and a half ago. We miss you, Mark, and we love you. And Mark actually studied some of the fish remains from the Presidio as well. So some of you may ask the question, why study chicken bones? First, because it's most efficient livestock animal that we have in that we can use. For example, the chickens. Oh, sorry. If you're wondering, pigs need 3,500. Pigs need about 6,000 liters of water to produce 1 kilogram of meat. Cows need 43,000 liters of water to produce 1 kilogram, 2 pounds of meat. Chickens need only 3,500 liters of water. This makes them very, very efficient animal for producing, obviously, meat and eggs. The study also, our study reflects some firsts. We study the chicken remains from the first European occupation in California, 151 years ago. The San Diego Presidio was established, and it was the first European occupation in California. And our study also represents the first comprehensive study of chicken bones, chicken remains, all North America. You will be surprised in 2020. And still our study is the first study that has been done on chicken remains, first comprehensive study. Just a little bit of introduction about the Presidio. The Presidio was established as on the mouth of San Diego River, on a hill overlooking the San Diego Bay, great strategic location. Obviously, in New California, the way that the Spaniards refer to it, or New Spain. And as I said earlier, the first European settlement, the first Spanish settlement in Upper California. The Presidio was established 1769, 151 years ago. Just a year ago, we observed the 250-year establishment of the Presidio. In 1825, the Presidio became the capital of California. In 1835, the Presidio was abandoned completely. So the life of Presidio would say about 60 years, from 1769 to the 1830s. Unfortunately, nowadays, the Presidio is buried under asphalt and grass. Let me change this. I'm pointing with my mouse. You can see the location of the Presidio today. You can see the road that's leading to the Serra Mesa, the Serra Museum. And the Presidio was excavated starting in the 1920s. And then there were major excavations in the 1970s, 1980s, 90s. In the late 90s represent the last excavation, and then the Presidio was backfilled, and as I said, today covered with asphalt and grass. Doesn't mean that the Presidio doesn't exist or it was destroyed. It wasn't. It's preserved. And it's waiting for us to maybe unearth it one day and make it a major attraction for San Diegans and Californians. Our faunal remains that we studied came from three major parts of the Presidio. The North Wing, which was a residential area of the Presidio. The West Wing, a residential area that was around here, and you can see the mouse, and an outside large midden, 3 meter deep, that was outside the walls of the Presidio. So our faunal remains that we studied came from those three areas. How did we collect the chicken remains, or the avian remains, or the faunal remains in general from the Presidio? We went to the facility of the San Diego, city of San Diego. We collected the faunal remains there. Susan Arter, who is a co-author on this article, is right here in this picture. And we collected the bones from various hundreds of boxes of artifacts that the Presidio yielded. We also went through various archaeological journals and field notes to gather information about the process of the excavations, to get more information and to understand what we are looking at. And then we took the faunal assemblage to the San Diego Natural History Museum, and our laboratory is located over there, and this is where we conducted our study. So first, before I'm going to progress slowly to get to the main course, chickens. But before that, I would like to share with you that we identified 16 different species of non-avian remains, like obviously the domesticated animals like the cow, pigs, and sheep. We identified remains of raccoons, dogs, cats, various small mammals like rabbits, kangaroo rats, squirrels, gophers, wood rats. And with regard to the avian remains, we identified 21 different species of avian remains, of bird remains at the Presidio. Obviously, the more common domesticated animals like the turkey and geese, and obviously chicken, but also 4 different species of raptors: the bald eagle, red-shouldered hawk, red-tailed hawk, and barn owl. Various waterfowls like the widgeon, lesser scaup, and also species like the crow, sandhill crane, raven, and more. And now I'm gearing towards our chicken study. For those who saw earlier versions of our presentation, I can promise you there will be, I would say, dramatic revelations towards the end, and they're also in our paper, and I will share that with you tonight. Let's start with presenting the context of the San Diego Presidio. So first, when it was established, the first 2 decades, both the Presidio and the San Diego Mission were provisioned by supplies from Mexico. So they were reliant on those supplies. They received cattle, pigs, sheep, but the Spanish government did not allow the mission and the Presidio to slaughter those animals for food because they were supposed to use as seed stock and for breeding. So the situation was pretty dire, where people were hungry, and even after the first 2 decades, when the missions became more economically viable and independent, the presidios, because of the military role of the presidio, they were not economically independent, and they were reliant on the San Diego missions. Even though the Spanish government, the Spanish crown, promoted self-sufficiency, that was their interest, that every mission and every presidio will be self-sufficient. While the missions achieved this goal, for the most part, the San Diego Presidio and other presidios did not, as again, because of the role, they were busy with their military tasks, and they couldn't just focus on agricultural or economic self-sufficiency. So one of the first questions that we asked ourselves is, with regard to the presidios being provisioned with food, were chickens part of this food supply chain, or were they raised at the presidio? We will be able to answer this question with our zooarchaeological study. Before I come to answer this question, I would like to make 2 important notes. One is, when we look at the faunal remains from the presidio, we have, in fact, the largest sample of chicken remains from many other historical sites around the same period, from many other presidios and missions. For example, the San Francisco Presidio yielded about over 50,000 animal bones, yet they had in their assemblage only 150 chicken bones. We had a very small sample, even though we were focusing on collecting chicken bones from all the artifacts that were recovered from the Presidio. We still have the largest sample. This is very interesting. I don't have a clear answer why other presidios and missions did not yield as many chicken bones as we did, or even more, depends on their sample. The second note before getting to the study of our chicken is, and this is in general, when we do zooarchaeology, when we do our archaeology in general, we need to be careful with our conclusions. The reason is there might be many things that we don't see, and we need to remember that when we're drawing conclusions, because many things could have been not excavated, did not survive, did not preserve, and we need to be careful with our inferences before drawing cultural conclusions. So one of the things that we do is we check various factors, various agents that may destroy the bones and assess them. For instance, burning can destroy bones. Archaeology can destroy bones. This is refers to new breaks that mentioned here. Bones that are freshly broken during the archaeological dig or following phases like the collecting them, storing them, transferring them, and so on. Bones that are exposed to the elements can get weathered and destroyed. Bones can be destroyed by carnivores, dogs, can totally destroy bones. And the density of the bones also is a factor that I will talk about in the next slide. So when you look at those numbers, those are very low numbers, which tells us that destructive agents did not really affect the bone assemblage from the San Diego Presidio. This was encouraging. Let's talk about the density-mediated attrition. Different bones in our body, in chicken body, in any animal body, actually, they have different densities. The upper part of our arm is less dense than the lower part where our elbow is. This is just one example. So if we see that bones that are denser, stronger, survive more than bones that are less dense, we can postulate that there were destructive agents that destroyed the less dense bones and had the more dense bones survive better. So we checked data on density of turkey, and then we projected them into chicken bones in our assemblage. We compiled them against, we plotted them against their frequency for each element, like you see here. And we found no correlation between bone density and the relative frequency of this element, which tells us again that destructive agents were not a major factor in creating the bone assemblage. So the bones were not destroyed by destructive agents. That's our conclusion. And the last indication for that is that we found many, 23%, this is a lot of complete bones like that. This is quite rare in archaeological sites. Think of, archaeology, the site is 250 years old. People built walls on top of bones because the bones were part of the trash. Archaeology came in and they were using different tools, and yet many of those bones were still complete, which tells us again that the preservation of the bone assemblage was really well, and we can feel confident to draw now cultural, because we are not missing much evidence, we can draw cultural inferences from this bone assemblage. So I'm going to take you through different aspects of our study, and where we were trying to figure out how chicken were raised, if they were raised at the Presidio. So one of the things is we can tell male from female with regard to chicken, not with regard to any bird and any animal, but with regard to chicken, we have three factors that can tell us whether the bone came from a male chicken or a female chicken. One of them, which is pretty familiar, I'm sure most of you know about this, most males will have bone spurs. Females do have, they are not as prominent as you see, for instance, in this slide. However, we found no bone spurs in our bone assemblage. That doesn't mean that male did not were not present at the Presidio, and I explain that later why it's pretty obvious. But from the bone spur perspective, we couldn't tell male from female. The other study that we did is statistical. Males are larger than females with regard to chicken. However, there is an overlap between the size, the average size of males and the average size of females. So how can we tell which bone came from males and which bone came from female? And we did some statistical analysis. We measured the length of the bones and the width of the bones. And we created two data sets, one of the length and one of the width. We used statistical analysis that's called log ratio, where we put that two data sets together. I'm not going to bore you with the details right now. And then we took those two data sets and threw them into another statistical modeling that's called mixture analysis. Mixture analysis can analyze data sets and discern, tell us how many groups or how many populations exist in this group. In our case, we were looking for males versus females. So with regard to the width of the bone, as you can see here, this is the width of the bone. We mixture analysis identified two groups of two populations, small populations of males, and larger populations of females. The ratio between the males and the females is 1 to 12. 12 females, 12 hens for one rooster. Then we did the analysis for the length of the bone. Naturally, because we had not as many complete bones, the sample was rather small, but still it told us that the mixture analysis told us that there are three groups in this population. One of males, small group, larger group of females, and there is a group here which is smaller than the smallest females. While we were working on the bones, I noticed bones that looked like chicken, but were shorter than the normal chicken bones. When I was working on them, I called them pony chickens. In fact, there is a breed of chicken that's called creeper bantam. This is not a Photoshop. This is a creeper bantam, which is an offshoot of their original chicken. So throughout times, smaller, more compact chicken were established. Those are the creeper chickens. Take a look at this slide. This is a bone of the ulna, part of the wing bone of the chicken, the bantam chicken. This is same bone from the Natural History Museum collection, chicken bone, modern one. And this is a large, or say normal chicken bone from the San Diego Presidio. This is from the Presidio. This is from the Presidio. This is modern. You see the difference in the length. As you can tell, with regard to the width, there is not significant difference. This is why when we did the width, the mixture analysis could not depict the breed, the smaller breed. But when we did the length, the mixture analysis depicted there is another breed which is over here. It's a smaller breed. So from our zooarchaeological analysis, we can tell that there were two breeds of chicken at the San Diego Presidio. The last method of discerning males from females is called medullary bone. Chicken bones, bird bones in general, are hollow, like this one. However, when chickens, other birds, and some of the reptiles are in the process of egg laying, they transfer calcium from their blood system into their long bones. That's acts as a reservoir for calcium, so that it can be ready for building the eggshells. After the chicken finishes laying eggs, this reservoir, which is here, resorbs back to the blood system and the bone becomes hollow again. So this is what we call medullary bone. This is a reservoir, and it's an excellent method for telling us two very important things in zooarchaeology. One, this bone belonged to a female, 100%. We don't need to do statistical analysis for that. Only female lay eggs. The other thing, it tells us that this female was laying eggs. This is very important piece of information that we need. And I'll explain that a bit why. As I mentioned earlier, we had large proportion of complete bones. And we asked the permission of the city of San Diego to cut the bones into half and look for more medullary bones so we have a larger sample for analysis. Excuse me just a second. We did find medullary bone in some of the bones that we cut. This is the inner layer over here and here. This is a medullary bone that's found in a bone that was complete and we cut into half. When we looked at the general assemblage that we have with medullary bone, we found 53%. That's a large proportion of bone with medullary bone, which tells us those were females. Those were egg-laying females, which tells us that there was something very systematic of having egg-laying females at the Presidio. And I'll tell you later why it's an important piece of information. We need to remember also that the medullary bone exists for a brief period of time in the life history of chicken. It exists about 2 weeks before the chicken start laying eggs, and it resorbs back about 2 weeks after it laid the last egg. So the life history of chicken, those medullary bone occur for a short period of time, and the fact that we found such a large proportion of our sample with medullary bone tells us that there were even more that we probably don't see. So we could tell from the previous analysis that there were a lot of the ratio between females and males were a high ratio of females versus males. Now the question is, what is the situation between adults and juveniles? This is a fused ossified bone of a chicken. This is unfused in the process of ossification, and that tells us that this bone and those bones here belong to juvenile chickens or chicks, and those belongs to adult chickens. Chickens reach adulthood at around 6 months of age. We have the sequence for each bone when they ossify. The humerus, part of the upper arm or part of the wing bone of the chicken, ossifies as on average 21 weeks. We found 7 unfused, 12 fused, and the average unfused bones of this bone, of this particular skeletal element, the humerus, is 36%. The average of this whole table that you see here is, we found that there were 24%, around a quarter, of the bonus of our bone assemblage came from juvenile, immature chicken. We have a ratio of 25% versus 75% of, if you want, quarter and 3/4. Last thing that I would like to show you, and then we'll bring you to conclusions and what all this pieces of information tells us about our bone assemblage. We checked cut marks on chickens. You can see here, here, on those bones, over here. We also looked at the distribution of the different skeletal elements. And we noticed something very important. We noticed that there is only 9% of all our bone assemblage that came from the head, the toes of the chicken. That gives us the idea that the head and the toes were chopped before the chicken reached the area where it was consumed, tossed, and then recovered by the archaeologist. This is very similar to the chicken that we buy in the supermarket. They don't have the head and they don't have the toes, and which practically tells us that the Presidio people were eating chicken like we do today. If you are very interested about their, leg lovers versus wing lovers, the ratio is 1-to-1. They like both in the same quantities, in same amounts. And when we looked at the butchery, we noticed that most of the butchery marks, the cut marks, are on bones that came from the shoulder breast area, because there are tough tendons there that connects the bones. For instance, this the coracoid. This is a scapula and this is a coracoid. Those two bones are connected with tough tendons, and they require probably a knife to separate them. And this is why we see the cut marks on those bones. So what are our conclusions from all the data analysis that I just showed you? As I mentioned, we have high proportions of hens. We know that from our statistical analysis. We know that from our study of medullary bone. High proportions of females versus males. We know that based on the high percentage of medullary bone, that they had many chickens that were geared on the purpose of laying eggs. So production, if you want. We noticed that there were high proportions of, relatively high proportions of males, of juveniles. Quarter of our bone assemblage came from juvenile chickens. As I said earlier, we noticed that they were probably eating the whole chicken as we eat them today, with no preference to wing versus leg. And all those pieces of information lead us to strongly believe that the chicken were not part of the provisioning system. They were not, the presidios were not getting them from the outside. They were raising them and eating them at the presidio. I'll give you one example or two examples just to clarify that. If I was a supplier of chicken, I would send to the presidio my males. Nature, males are not very useful besides breeding. You don't need all the males for breeding, you need only a few. So the rest, I would just send away. However, the presidio, we saw large proportion of females. So we know that they were not a part of the provisioning system, but they were raised over there. Also, if I was a supplier, I wouldn't send somewhere else chicken that were just laying eggs. I want the eggs. I want to sell the eggs. I want to provision the eggs. We see in the presidio high proportion of laying hens, which tells us again that it's most likely because they were raised at the presidio and was not supplied to the presidio. Two notes about zooarchaeology and the historical record. One is very interesting. During the times of the presidios and the missions, all animals, most livestock animals, were inventoried in a regular basis. And when we look at the historical documents, we see oftentimes numbers of how many cows existed in a certain, like say, the San Diego Presidio or San Diego Mission, how many sheep, how many horses, how many female horses, how many female cows, how many juvenile cows, how many juvenile horses, and so on and so on. But when it comes to chicken, no numbers. However, we do know that chicken definitely existed. I'll give you an example. I worked on a bone assemblage from the San Diego mission, not the Presidio, the mission. And 7% of my bone assemblage of the livestock animals was chicken bones. However, when I went to the historical documents, the San Diego mission, there are quite a few, as I said, inventory data, statistical data on what existed at the mission. And they list all the other animals, the larger animals, in details, but no mention of chicken. However, we know that chicken did exist at the mission. And this is very interesting thought that chicken, and I will get to that in a bit, why chicken were not enumerated, why were they not counted. On the other hand, when we read the historical text, chicken is mentioned, not in numbers, not in statistical records, but mentioned as some chicken were provided to the Presidio. Sheep that anchored in San Diego Bay were provisioned by chicken from the mission and the Presidio. Feasts that holiday feasts that occurred at the Presidio, chicken is mentioned as part of the food that was consumed at those holiday feasts. So definitely chicken did exist, but it wasn't counted. And this is very interesting. There is one rare incident where, and I thank Paul Chase for referring us to this document, where we see numbers of chicken. And Father Fermin-Lucen, visited the mission of San Borja in Baja California, and mentioned there in just very brief sentence, also chicken run with 2 roosters and 18 hens. This is, if you do the math, a ratio of 1 rooster to 9 hens. If you look at our zooarchaeological data, our zooarchaeological data shows that we had 8.5 hens for 1 rooster. So this is pretty rare, where we can, as I said earlier, in archaeology, we have to make a lot of inferences and assumptions and interpretations. We don't have real strong evidence because we are interpreting the past. And in this case, in very rare incident, we can compare our interpretation, which is here, an actual historical document, which is here. And we were very close to this ratio. And this is also, we probably did a good job with our statistical analysis. Another thing that will give us excellent perspective on the importance of chickens, which I think they were much more important than their meat and eggs. When we look at ethnographic data on chickens, nowadays, modern times, chicken is a very important backyard animal, bird, for many families in developing countries. Practically, as you can see, as I noted here, most families in the village level are owners of few chicken to more in their backyard. The chicken is mostly maintained by women and children with very little input of labor. The chicken runs around, scavenge over discarded other elements, earthworms, insects, and household refuse. Very easy to feed. They do not need very low maintenance, and women and children are the one who take care of the chicken. So they eat earthworms and insects. They just naturally serve as pest control and provide. They also provide organic fertilizer. So chicken plays an important role in poverty alleviation. People from those families in developing countries go to work in minimum wage in Africa, in Southeast Asia. As you can probably tell, the wage there is very low, but they come home and they still have additional supplement supply of meat and eggs, which is very important for them. Another amazing advantage for chicken is, even if there was a disaster, we know of wars in Africa, environmental disasters, within a few months, you can build yourself a flock of chicken, again, that will feed you and your family with meat and eggs. So this is extraordinary advantage of chicken, as I said, more than they're just meat and eggs. And here is a very, very current and relevant perspective on the importance of chicken. When we finished writing our article, we got into the pandemic, and we started seeing pieces in the news that talking about people getting chickens for their backyard um, for this exact reason that I mentioned earlier. They help supplement the irregular supplies that people have. Here is a piece from the Fence Post. I found it online from June 5, 2020, and it says, the backyard chicken boom can also be attributed to the way COVID crisis has revealed weaknesses in the food supply chain that have driven people to create their own food source in their own backyard. This is exactly what we have been seeing just now, and that tells you how relevant poultry husbandry is to our lives, even nowadays. So with regard to the Presidio, as I mentioned earlier, imagine the people from the Presidio 250 years ago waiting for the supply to arrive, and it did not arrive. They go back to their backyard, they have chicken and eggs to supplement them until the supplies arrive. Supplies arrive, but there can be, and we know this from historical documents, there can be rotten and unedible. And they were complaining about it 150 years ago. They go to their backyard, they have a supplement of chicken and eggs that hold them floating until something more edible arrives. Go back in time, go forward in time, 250 years forward, 2020, the year 2020, we go to the supermarket and the shelves are empty. We go to our backyard, some of us, and we have supplement of meat and eggs that keeps us floating. As I refer this as a cash under our mattress. This is our anchor. This is our saver until we get to better times, until the shelves are full, until the supply arrives. So as I said, the importance of chicken is way more than their meat and eggs. They provide economic independence, a form of independence, and security, economic security that would not be achieved without those feathered birds in our backyards. They, as I mentioned earlier, low labor input. We can get a high value protein, and they at the Presidio, I suspect that the people of the Presidio even use them as to exchange goods with a mission and with other ships that anchored at the San Diego Bay, meaning that people from the Presidio, because they didn't have regular source of income, they would provide chicken in barter for other goods. Before I conclude, I would like to thank the Rod Heller Memorial Scholarship Fund, who helped us fund this study, the City of San Diego. We are grateful to the City of San Diego for all their help and cooperation and funding of this study, and an anonymous donor also. Paul Chase, that I mentioned earlier, was the one who started all this study. He called us to take some bones at the Presidio, and we figure out those are chicken bones, and this is how the study started. Group of people, dear people, that I call them the Fellowship of the First Chicken Burrito. I can name a few: Myra Herman, Stephen Wormer, Zaira Marquez. We had a group of volunteers that help us with going into the San Diego City facilities, looking through, as I said, the field notes and journals, and understanding the excavations of the Presidio that occurred 30 and 40 years ago, before we started working on the bone assemblage. Now I'm ready for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sasson. So we will now take questions. My name is Dante Ferenga. I'm the Development and Marketing Director at the San Diego Archaeological Center, and I will be moderating tonight's questions. Just as a reminder, you can use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. Right, and our first question, any idea of the percentage of meat stripped from the bone raw versus cooked meat with the bone in?
Don't, but assume that we're, when we strip the meat from the bones, some of us also gnaw on the bones and nibble on the rest of the meat. So I would assume that it's pretty similar. I'm assuming that cooked meat will provide more, but not much more. As I said, assuming that we also nibble and gnaw on the bones and get all the meat from the bones with our teeth.
Can any DNA analysis be done on these remains? Do we know anything about the genealogy of the Presidio chickens? For instance, were they descendants of indigenous chickens or chickens imported from Spain?
Excellent question. We hope to do that. We just recently we had some communication of a group of researchers that may be interested in doing that. We would love to first confirm that we have two breeds of chicken. This is something that we tell from our zooarchaeological analysis, but only DNA will confirm that 100%. We would love to know where the chicken came from. Did it come from Mexico? Which that's what I assume. That would be my hypothesis, but I would love to confirm that. So definitely DNA is in line to answer all those questions for sure.
Any evidence that chicken feathers were collected for pillow or mattress stuffing?
I was gonna say earlier that, you know, I keep saying meat and eggs, but I believe that chickens were used for everything that they had. I'm not sure about toilet paper nowadays, but I'm sure their feathers were used. I don't have evidence from historical documents. If anyone in the audience that more in the historical parts can enlighten me about that, that would be great. But I have a reason to believe that the feathers and the bones were used. The bones can be used as owls or needles, or sometimes even musical instruments. I have a reason to believe that those bones and feathers were used as well.
Were the Presidio male chickens perhaps sent elsewhere? Would that account for the odd ratio?
No, I don't believe so, and I'll tell you why. When we looked at compositions of cow herd, sheep herds, and any other livestock animals, we normally see similar ratios. Large proportion of females, small proportion of males that were responsible for reproduction and breeding. And when more males are born, they practically culled at a certain age, they were slaughtered. And we see those ratios of high proportion of females versus small proportion of males in other groups of animals, in domesticated animals, not wild animals. So we think that's actually gives us another idea why we think that the chickens were raised at the Presidio. And I will add another point that I forgot to mention earlier. When I talked earlier that other animals were enumerated, were counted when fathers did inventories of Presidio submissions, but chickens were not. I have a reason to believe that those animals that were involved in supply system provisioning were counted. They needed to know. The animals that were part of the household, part of the backyard household, were not counted. Which also, again, this is another indication that chickens were raised at by the various households at the Presidio and were not part of this barter, exchange, and provisioning system.
While feathers are difficult to find in the archaeological record, are there any other secondary products with feathers or claws that were found throughout the Presidio?
The Presidio weren't generally much more comprehensive study in many other aspects, not just from the chicken. We studied a very small sample of what we have. I think we have about 400 boxes of artifacts and ecofacts as in organic material that came from the Presidio. And we studied a very little sample. I would love to see all those artifacts being analyzed in high advanced technology, and hopefully we'll be able to find remnants of feathers and other materials, eggshells, for instance, and other materials that we can add another aspect to the study. I am sorry about that. There you go.
How often were chickens imported from outside of a region, or was the population of chickens owned by the human population within the San Diego region largely self-sustaining?
So as I mentioned earlier, I think the first group of animals, including chicken, probably arrived to the Presidio in 1769. I think that other animals kept coming to the Presidio for as seed stock and for breeding. But I think after the initial provisioning of chickens to the Presidio, this is where the Presidio people were raising the chicken, breeding them, and all of that. It would be very interesting to know. I don't have an answer for that right now. For instance, the bantam chicken, the other breed of the smaller breed of chicken, when did it arrive? Did it arrive in the first sheep to the Presidio or later? And so that may gives us an idea if there were more phases of supplies of chicken to the Presidio. But again, our study yet cannot answer that. I'm hoping with a larger, broader study, we will be able to answer those questions.
Did you find anything unexpected when the Presidio midden was excavated?
Lots of animal bones. Nothing surprising beyond the fact that we obviously we knew it was deep, very rich. It probably reflects years of refuse accumulation that was dumped outside the Presidio. We think that this midden served as a foundation for a gun battery, and that's why it wasn't just a trash pile. It was thrown there with a purpose of building a gun battery on top of it. Anything surprising, I cannot think of. So I don't think so that we had anything surprising with this regard to this midden.
All right, and it looks like we have one more question. Are there any sort of studies of avian pathology, i.e. indications of chickens undergoing a period disease outbreak in a given range of time?
Right, a very interesting question. Not in our assemblage. And again, I will repeat that we have a rather small sample, and I won't be surprised if we will see pathologies, even maybe evidence for diseases in chicken and other animal and any other livestock animals, the Presidio. But for that, we need to study way more a larger sample of bones to get that. In our small sample, we didn't see evidence for diseases or pathologies.
Well, once again, thank you so much, Dr. Sasson, for tonight's talk. And thank you to everyone for attending tonight's living room lecture. Just as a reminder, our series continues with a day in the life of a Renaissance physician next Thursday. For more info on this and other upcoming events, please visit our website, sandiegoarchaeology.org. Thank you and have a good night.